Hey there, thanks for joining me for this CarePortal Orientation. My name is Kyle Johnson. I'm the regional manager, likely for your area if you are watching this video. I'm assuming that you are watching this either because you are a new point person, which means you're joining the team of the people already getting the requests at your church, or you're implementing this for the very first time in your church. Either way, I'm going to cover everything that we need to kind of just get you started in understanding how the technology works, really what the technology is equipping you to step into, right? What is this work? How is it connected to the ministries that you might have access and leadership in? We'll talk through just what does it actually look like to use the technology? What options do you have? What happens when you respond? I mean, all of those questions we'll cover. And then finally, we'll spend a little bit of time just talking about the ministry focus of acknowledging the delicacy of these families that you'll be interacting with, and then what we've learned to be some best practices of developing relationships with them in those situations. So as we get started here, I want to back us all the way up and just kind of get us to see past the ministry passions that we have, right? We all tend to have like those certain types of ministries that we really, really love or are motivated by, whether it's maybe homelessness or evangelism or sex trafficking or just all of the different buckets that we create that we love to kind of compartmentalize. But if we back all the way up, we have to acknowledge that the whole reason that we do any of those ministries is for the sake of obedience. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do. That's why your church exists. That's why I'm recording this video. That's why you're watching this video. So it gives us that common ground to understand that we've been given the greatest commandment, right? Which is why ultimately that God created the universe, was so that we would know Him, we would worship Him, we would serve Him. And that greatest commandment sums up all the law and the prophets of the Old Testament. That points to Jesus and His promised salvation, that He is coming back to redeem us and coming back to take us to the place that He's prepared for us. And that He's given us this great commission to share what He has done for us and to sacrifice all of it. And our goal as Christians is really to just honor this by doing what He's told us to do, which is to illustrate our faith by engaging the most vulnerable among us. And this is something that is just so unavoidable. If you read the scriptures, it's everywhere. It's Old Testament, New Testament, the Gospels, epistles, everything. You just cannot get around the fact that God wants us to be engaged in caring for the most vulnerable. And one of probably the clearest ways, or the clearest scriptures that He's given us, is James 1:27. And I'm sure that you've heard this before. Maybe you're even just almost sick of hearing about it because it's so common among all the organizations that use this as their tagline or their vision statement. But I just want to kind of maybe consider it from a different perspective here with you, and just ask a really basic question, and that's, why did James write this? Why was it pure and faultless religion to look after the widows and the orphans, and not pure and faultless religion to find homes for the homeless, or free the slaves, free those who are in bondage with sex trafficking? Like, that's really the beautiful thing. When we start to think about this, religion is ultimately just practicing what we believe, right? And what we believe as Christians is that God the Father gave us hope in a hopeless situation. We had no way of earning our own salvation, and so He came through and adopted us from the dysfunctional world that we are stuck in. And so suddenly it makes sense that He wants us to, as believers in this truth, to engage in this same type of work, so that we can show other people exactly what our God is like, and what kind of things that He does for us on an eternal scale. So we have that ability to just say, okay, that's so important. It doesn't matter whether my passion is homelessness, or my passion is just world missions, or what. We all have to acknowledge that our religion is ultimately a message of adoption, and that all ministry does come down to somehow be engaged in caring for fatherless families, caring for fatherless individuals, even if that's just me telling them about the gospel. If they don't know the gospel, they are a fatherless individual, and they need to know that God is there for them and that He has paid the price to bring them into His family. Another really cool piece of this, now we're at this point in history where we have all this data now that points to fatherless homes being the very source of so many other issues in our society. Sex trafficking was probably the one that surprised me the most when I learned that between 70 to 80% of human trafficking victims in the United States were at one point in the foster care system. Same thing with the prison populations, right? In prison ministry, if you were to go into a prison block and ask the inmates to gather around and to ask them, hey, those of you who grew up in a fatherless home or grew up in the foster care system, raise your hands. I guarantee you will have more hands risen than not risen. Same thing with homelessness. I mean, this literally plays out in every single stage of ministry that we have. Again, we've compartmentalized these to be separate when they were really never meant to be separate. So as we back up and really kind of acknowledge our starting point, I think we should just acknowledge that all of these ministries have something to do with orphan care. We just may not have seen it from that perspective before. But when it comes to the gospel, all of it is orphan care. It's got to be, because this is the pure and faultless religion. This is what we believe. All right. Now, the numbers of what we're really going into here and just the true measurement of what fatherless families look like in the United States, unfortunately, we have pretty solid numbers that can point to very, very real and unfortunate trends of what's really going on in our society. And that starts with just a number of investigations that take place every year by the Child Protective Services, or the equal agency for each state, for them to acknowledge an allegation and to step into a family and to determine, hey, what's going on here? Are kids being kept safe, or are they at risk? We've given that agency permission to do that, and we rely on them to make a good judgment on hey, are these kids at risk? And unfortunately, about 400,000 of those kids, it's determined that they're not safe and they need to be put into a different living situation, even if it's just temporary. So we go from 4 million to 400,000. Unfortunately, about 100,000 of those kids will not return back to their parents, and they will have the parental rights will be terminated, and they'll be up for adoption. It's really helpful to kind of understand there's a lot more kids that are actually returning home out of foster care than there are who are up for adoption. But the fact remains, 100,000, man, that is a lot of kids that need to be adopted nationally. And unfortunately, about 30,000 of them will not be adopted. They'll turn 18 before they are adopted, which means that the state is no longer responsible for them. They're adults. The state gets to kind of just clean their hands of them, say, go and just be a successful adult and contribute to society. It's going to be great. And unfortunately, the numbers and the data does not look well upon those kids who age out of foster care. I mean, we kind of covered it before, but the unfortunate reality is that a lot of them end up on the streets, in prison, trafficked. I mean, just the future that's awaiting for kids that age out of foster care is it's really heartbreaking. And it's helpful to see these numbers to get us motivated, because we in our context, we need to see the numbers. We need to understand why is there a need, what's really going on here. But I also want to make sure that we don't mistake these numbers for the actual problem. Okay, these numbers point to the problem. They are not the problem in themselves. And the reason I can say that is because if you had a sink, so let's say your kitchen sink in your home is leaking water, you would look at somebody and laugh if they said that they can fix your sink with a bucket. Or it wouldn't be just a bucket, maybe just an infinite supply of buckets. Like, oh, I'll just bring in a trailer full of buckets, and we'll just catch the water when it comes out, and we'll put it somewhere else when it, when it's full. If we were to approach these numbers as if they were the problem, that means that the solution to this problem would basically just be to put the kids somewhere else. We need just more families. We just need more foster families, more adoptive families. And while we do need those very, very badly, because you know what, you do need a bucket to fix the sink. That's important. But more importantly is you need a wrench. You need something that can take straight to that pipe and keep that water from coming out of the pipe in the first place. And that's actually what we are pointing to with these numbers, is that the real problem is that the families are disintegrating. Our culture is bleeding families. We're hurting. And so what ends up, we have to acknowledge is, well, the solution then would be if we could have access to where those families are, especially from the church's perspective. And that gets to be some really interesting case studies when you acknowledge that since the creation of the Child Welfare Department, I think it was in the 60s in the United States, the church has actually kind of cut off itself from the access to these families, and I guess rightfully so, because when a child is being abused or is suspected of being abused, we don't tell people to call the church. We tell people to call the police, right? We tell people to call the government to handle those situations. But the byproduct of that is that the church suddenly has way less access, or more restrictive access, to the people that are hurting the most. And so we end up having to get really creative. We have to go out there solo and have to meet with families that we don't, maybe we have to wait for them to call us, right? Maybe we have a benevolence phone line for our church, and then you're going to inevitably find, and we don't know who's calling us. They might be going through the phone book. They might be just ringing up every church in town and asking for $20 or $50. It's really, really difficult for us to have verified good needs coming through on a regular basis that we can confidently be equipping our people to respond with. So we end up having to relegate it to the experts on our staffs, right? To kind of let them handle it. Or maybe we do outreach in a form of community events, right? Well, we really don't know who's coming to those community events, right? We send out mailers, but we don't know what situations are really happening. And so all that to say, the access to families that are hurting in our own communities, it's really taken a hit from the church's perspective. And it would be amazing if we had a way to reconnect the church and the believers in that church, not just one or two staff members, but everybody back with the needs that are in our area, so that we can step in and respond with the light of Christ that we're called to carry with us. So these numbers, I know they get really daunting on a national level, but the reality is you can go and look at the CarePortal map. If you go to careportal.org, there's a map on there that you can go and zoom into your county. If it's an active CarePortal county, there's numbers that are specifically for your county. How many investigations are performed every year, how many kids are removed from their families, how many kids are up for adoption. All of that's available for you to know, so that you can just really understand what's the story in my own community. What gets really interesting is when you start looking at how many churches are in your community as well, and what that might look like if the church were to step in on a full scale, not just one or two people from that church, but everybody in that church opening up and saying, well, what can I do? What skills do I have that I can engage in this work? And that's really what CarePortal is designed to give you a chance to do with your church and your ministries. I want to emphasize here that CarePortal is not the ministry. You and your churches have the ministries. CarePortal is the tool, the technology that allows those ministries that you're already doing and engaging in to be more effective in reaching out into the community. So here's the process, right, that we're going to be going through. Essentially, you've got families that are in need. We know that they're out there. It's hard to find them. It's hard to really understand what they really, really need when they're self-reporting, right? So we kind of covered that before, but the reality is that there's a lot of agencies, and there's a lot of caseworkers out there that are already visiting these homes and identifying very legitimate ways for these families to be helped. And so we train the caseworkers to enter those needs into the CarePortal technology. The technology alerts the local churches to that family, and that church then has the access to that family to be part of their community, to be a healthy aspect of their life in your neighborhood that allows them to get a leg up and understand the gospel along the way in a little bit better, more contextualized way. Now, there's a lot of understanding out there around orphan care, and I mentioned this before, where we tend to compartmentalize orphan care into very, very distinct buckets, and just like we do with other ministry, right? But the unfortunate reality is that we've basically just reduced orphan care to fostering and adopting. You're like bringing kids into your home, getting the license from the agency, getting your home inspected, and filling out the adoption paperwork, and bringing kids into your home. The reality is that only a small percentage of Christians are really equipped and able and even called to do that type of orphan care. That is a very huge need, and it's an honorable need. And I feel that call in my own life. But you know what? My wife and I, we're actually not at a point where we can do that. There's a lot of other families around in the church that are in the exact same place where we are. We want to. That would be amazing, but we can't. Not right now. We would never be able to get licensed with the just all kinds of different issues going on in our lives. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for me and my wife? Does that mean that we can't engage in pure and faultless religion? I mean, that sounds like a mandate from the scriptures for all of us to be engaged in this, and yet we've defined orphan care in a way that only a small percentage of us can actually be involved in. And so if you were to ask me, that's a definition problem. We really need to open this back up and understand there's so much more to do when it comes to orphan care, and that it represents pure and faultless religion to bring a bed or a crib or a car seat to a mom who's struggling, that has an open CPS case, that's vulnerable, that could possibly lose her kids if she's not supported in the right way. Or maybe to bring a bed to a grandmother who is literally the last line of defense to keep her grandkids out of foster care, but she just needs some support. That's orphan care as well, when we're preventing and keeping things going from the family, the biological family perspective. It doesn't become orphan care as soon as the family, is separated. That's not, first of all, that's not a good entry point for the church to wait until the family has been separated. We should be willing and excited to step in to preserve families, to provide reconciliation as well, because the gospel is about that, right? So it just helps to understand this full spectrum of orphan care. And even on the transition side, what you'll find through CarePortal is that some of the biological parents that you're going to be bringing these items to and getting to know and hopefully developing a relationship with in your own backyard, some of these families might have actually grown up in foster care themselves, which means that there's a generational cycle going on where, you know what, is it really that surprising that they don't know some good parenting techniques, right? I mean, is it really that surprising that they ended up with their own CPS case? It really shouldn't be that surprising, but unfortunately, because we don't really understand the full scope of orphan care, we tend to not look at the parents as orphans just because they're grown, when in reality, they still very much have an orphan mentality. And sometimes when you step into a CarePortal request and you're bringing a grandmother or a biological parent an item that they really need, sometimes you're doing orphan care on a transition level because that 30-year-old mom or that 35-year-old grandmother, man, she aged out of foster care herself. You're actually caring for her in an orphan care perspective, just like you're caring for her kids on a prevention level. So it's just really helpful. And what you'll find with this grid is that really, I would say that most of your ministries at your church will fit on to this grid somewhere. We might not have understood that ministry to be on the spectrum of orphan care, but it really is, just because that's where these families are coming from. That's where these families end up going. It's all connected. So it's just helpful. And I would encourage you guys to use this as much as you can to understand how your current ministries really are engaging in this work. Because we need to understand ministry from the perspective of pure and faultless religion. When it comes to the actual technology, I've seen generally three different types of implementation strategies within churches. That doesn't mean that, the one that you pick at the very beginning is absolutely the one that you have to stick with. There's a lot of fluidity and a lot of flexibility in here, and it's really designed, the technology is designed to give you as much flexibility as you absolutely could possibly find, because we understand ministries operate differently. So just think from your perspective with all of this. In some cases, like in Church A on the screen here, that there's one person that's getting the CarePortal requests on behalf of the whole church. A lot of the time, this is kind of in like a pilot mode, and that's totally fine. We just, one person can have a family or three families that they're kind of sharing these needs with, and then they can kind of support and work together as they can to respond to requests. In other cases, you might have several ministry leaders. Maybe you have your local outreach pastor. Maybe you have a couple elders. Maybe you have a men's ministry volunteer, a couple Sunday school teachers. Whoever it might be, you can put as many people onto that list of point people as you would like, and then ideally, for each new point person, you get another group of support team members that are willing to kind of engage and help make responses. And then finally, you've got the Church C model, which means that you can have separate ministries or separate small groups enroll completely independently from each other, still underneath the kind of the covering of what we would call the parent church. Okay, so what's really nice about this is that you can have each separate team or each separate group enroll with a separate address. Okay, so they would be spread across the city or spread across the county, but the requests that group of point people will see will be based on where they live. All right, so it's always going to be local. One group might get one request that another group across town from the same church doesn't receive because they're tracked separately in different parts of the map. So it's just really helpful. Again, you can use it in so many different ways. My own church, we have the Church C model, and we have different families that are enrolled from all across the county. I think we cover pretty much the entire county just within our church, even though our church is in, the Southwest Fort Worth. And yet, because we have families in all other parts of the county, we've got people that are from our church that are seeing requests that are nowhere near our church, but they're near where they live. And that's the whole point, right? We're called to be the light of Christ where we are. The main thing here that I want to point out from a church leadership perspective is just to make sure that you have a pastor who is connected to each of the point people, each of the groups, because what ends up happening here is an amazing opportunity for discipleship, an amazing chance to come in and say, hey, what are you seeing? What are you engaging in? And what are you struggling with, right? There's an awesome opportunity for growth here that I think we tend to get very, very much focused on, let's just help these kids, right? Let's just help those that are less fortunate, that are hurting. And we forget the fact that the scriptures actually promise that when the people, when the saints are equipped for the work of the ministry, I mean, you look at Ephesians 4, I think it's verses 11 through 13, when the saints are equipped for the work of the ministry, the promise that follows that is that the church itself will be built up, that believers will grow in maturity, and that the unity of the faith will be obtained within the church. I mean, these are promises that have actually nothing to do with, let's just go help those poor people. This is benefit for the church. The blessing of the ministry is really meant to be the discipleship that takes place on both sides, right? The discipleship that the church gets to engage in with the families, but also the growth that happens when we are the ones engaging and witnessing what's going on. So just take advantage of that opportunity. If you're a pastor, if you're connected to your pastor, make sure that they're involved. Have a debrief time with your leaders every time you go and make a response to a CarePortal request and meet a new family. I've got debrief questions that we've formed specifically for that exact purpose, just to give people a chance to really dive in. Okay, what is God doing here? What has He challenged us with on this? And what's our next step? What should we be doing now? All right, spent a lot of time on that one. I wanted to just make sure you guys are aware too. We have a poverty simulation that might be just an amazing training piece for you as well. This is something that it's an immersive experience where you are literally role playing the perspective of a family, a real family actually. It's so helpful to understand just the complexity and the confusion that happens within the poverty mindset. And when we're engaging families that are really stuck in generational poverty, a lot of times it's just helpful to understand a little bit more of just how complicated it can be, how confusing it can be, and what's helpful versus what's not helpful. I mean, a lot of the time we come in and we just think that we've got to have a brochure for everything, and we can't actually help until we can give them a phone number or a website that allows them to fix their issue. But a lot of time we forget that sometimes just showing up empty-handed, saying, "Man, I'm here because I care about you, and I'm here to just walk alongside you, and maybe I can help, but maybe I'm just here to encourage you and say, man, I care that that you have healthy community, right? I mean, there's so many things that contribute to poverty that we don't think about. So all that to say, I would highly recommend it. Here's the really great news, though. CarePortal will cover the cost of that simulation for your church if you would like to host it. So we just ask for at least 75 participants to be involved in that. If we are going to cover the cost of that, we would basically open that up to, as long as you're hosting it, you can invite anybody from your community. So that could be teachers, it could be agency workers. And that could be an amazing relational builder for your church to offer that for your community. And because we're covering the cost, hey, there's actually a good way for you to maybe turn that into a fundraiser and use that for your own ministry purposes where more requests get met. So, man, let your mind just really swirl on that, because there's a lot of really great ways to do that. I'm one of the licensed facilitators for Texas, so very likely could be me that is your facilitator for that day. So I would be involved in helping you guys plan that and get it set up and everything. I have not done one of these simulations and not walked away just so amazed at how God grows us to understand just what it really means to be in the community and working for the betterment of the kingdom, right? And understanding how we can really make an impact. So it's awesome. The debrief time on that is one of just the best things we could possibly do for our churches. Okay, let's go into the technology. We'll spend the last half of the orientation just talking about this. And this is, I show this map just to show you the pure scale of how this is working and growing. It's really, really amazing to watch it grow. And you can go deeper in and just local and see the data of how many kids are being served and how many active churches there are. And I mean, it's just incredible, the economic impact, even because we track not just like how, what did you pay for this crib that you're giving to this mom? We track, okay, what is this crib doing for this mom, right? What does this crib mean from a case perspective when you're keeping a child out of foster care with this crib that you just bought, right? You're obviously doing way more than just like $50 that you may have paid for the crib. So that's what we track. There's algorithms that we have, which I'll show you in a few minutes. But all that to say, the map is a really great interactive tool that you can go in and explore and just see what's going on. But let's dive in really to like each section of this process, okay? When we know that right now there are caseworkers that have an open caseload on, anywhere between like 16 to 30 different families, right? And when there's an open case in terms of CPS, in Texas, that means that there has to be at least one visit every month for that family. Okay, so these visits are happening all the time, right? And as the caseworkers are out there communicating and getting to know these families, they're identifying what I would call like catalyst needs that would help the family get out of the situation that they're in. Okay, well, when the caseworker identifies that need, and they have the training for CarePortal in mind, they have a way to get the family to sign a waiver, giving them permission to share their information with the church, and then they enter that need into the CarePortal system, which gets immediately pushed to their supervisor for approval. Okay, so 3 sets of eyes are on this request before any churches ever see a request. There's the family saying, yes, we would receive this item from a church. It's the caseworker saying, man, I really think that this would help you guys. And the supervisor of that caseworker saying, I don't think this is an unreasonable request. Let's see if we can get a response, okay? When they enter the request, they also have to identify, this is the purpose statements. I kind of mentioned this earlier. Each of these purpose statements have a separate algorithm or like a formula that we can track. Okay, generally speaking, what does this mean when something like this is done for a family? What's the impact that happens? And so there's a document that if you're really, really technical, I can show you the exact formula. Most people don't really care about that much, that stuff, but I have looked at it. I'm kind of a numbers geek, so I think it's interesting. If you wanted to see it, I can always show you, but these purpose statements represent different boxes of the grid, really, what it comes down to. You'll see everything that's reunify a biological family, to preserve an adoptive placement, to just help with improve a child's well-being. These are children, obviously, that are very vulnerable and at risk. So yeah, you see the whole spectrum here, and you'll see that purpose statement at the very top of the email and the request. So you'll see that here in just a second. But when it comes to the church's perspective, what you're going to be looking for is the right request, right? Whether it's the right distance or the right item. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do that, okay? There's the active way of finding requests, which is literally just you going to the website and clicking open requests, and you can search literally the entire country's open requests. And you've got these search options. You can go by county, by zip code. You can even go by keyword. And that last one, the keyword, is really kind of cool, because what it inevitably means is that you can find an item that you know is a common request, whether it's a crib, a twin bed, a toddler bed, or whatever, and you can go and search and see, okay, what open requests are around me that I might be able to step into, right? It might even be one county over from where you are, but because you have the item, you have a way to actually connect with and communicate with the churches that did get that request. It's all done through the CarePortal system. I'll even show you what that looks like. So I would just encourage you guys to, I promise you'll probably never look at a yard sale the same way ever again. Because every time I drive by a yard sale, I'm looking, it's like, ooh, do they have a crib? Do they have something that I could use for CarePortal? Because ultimately what that means for me is that I'm getting my foot in the door with a family that's local to me, and I get to let them know who Jesus is, what he's done for us, and the way that I care for them. All right, so that's the active way. You can also go into the map and literally click on individual requests based on where they are. Okay, so when you zoom in, you'll see the requests that are the red with the exclamation point, and then the orange shields with the cross on them. Those are the individual churches. Okay, so you can see the radius that it was sent to, the number of churches, everything. It's just really helpful to kind of see every once in a while, to go to the map and say, okay, boy, that request doesn't have any local churches around it. Maybe we should step into that one, even though we're a little further away than we thought. But you can respond from this page as well. You see up in this corner here, you can respond there. And then the other option is just to wait till the email comes to you, right? So I say that this is the passive way of using the system. And you'll see everything that you might need to know about that request right at the very front of it. I mean, just, okay, what's the purpose? In this case, it's help strengthen a bio family. What's being requested? In this case, it's 3 to 4 cans of powdered formula for a baby. It'll tell you the zip code of the family, the county, the urgency level, how many kids. I mean, and then the description is usually really helpful to understand, hey, what's a little bit of the backstory here, right? And ultimately, with all of this information, you should be able to see it and know whether or not your church or your ministry can step in or should step in. If a request does not get a response in like the certain amount of time, it's all based on the urgency level. The normal urgency level is 7 to 10 days. So if the response does not come through within like 6 days, the technology will escalate the radius to an additional group of churches, just hoping to get a response from one of them, right? So we don't want to see families go without their needs met, but it does happen, unfortunately, sometimes. We just want to give it every chance we can. And then if you were to keep scrolling down in the email, you'll see underneath the description, you'll see all the response options, all right? So you got the respond, activate community, church to church, commit to pray. We'll go through each of those really, really briefly. When you click on the respond button, okay, you're going to be brought to a page that is specifically format or coded, I should say, for your church. Okay, that's a really cool thing about technology. So this email that goes to your church, it knows which church it's being sent to. So when you click respond, it's going to say, okay, XYZ church is responding. We just need to verify their information based on what we have on file for their point people. Okay, so you'll notice that it'll tell you on this page any previous responses to the request, but ultimately it gives you a chance to enter your name at the very top of that in that drop-down box. And if it's your first time, the instructions are really clear. You can just click that little orange plus sign and add your name to the system. If you're a point person, your name should already be added because that's what we do when we add your name into the system. You'll be there, but you'll basically just start typing your first name, add your last name, and it'll find you in the system, and then it'll ask you to verify your information down below in that second box. All right. I will say there's a way for you to maybe forward the original request email to anybody else from your church or your ministry. I don't know if the power of delegation is really, really strong. So if you're trying to raise up leaders, you can always forward those emails and say, hey, you went with me on the last request. Why don't you respond on this one and handle the logistics, right? And training up more and more point people, that could be a great way of doing that. When you do that and you allow somebody who's not a point person to make a response, they will still put their name in this top box, okay? And again, if they haven't used it before, they'll have to enter their information on that little plus sign there. But then because you're still the point person, they would have to verify your email address in that process, okay? Because you're the registered person for your church, right? Or one of them. So just be aware of that. And that, technology works in so many different ways. We can talk for days about it, but ultimately, whatever you type in that box down at the very bottom, that is what the caseworker is going to see. And then it's also what other churches will see, just like you see in this, in the previous responses up at the top. It'll be what other churches will be able to read as well. All right. So let's go back to this email. The next option would be to activate your community. Okay. So what we do is we group up relevant zip codes, right? That we want to see churches in those zip codes working together. It could be the entire county. It could be one part of a county. But ultimately, when you click this button, it basically creates like a church huddle of all the churches that are in that area so that you can kind of create a dialogue around that one request. Okay, so you see the request details down at the bottom of the email. But this is ultimately a church that's saying, well, we can cover part of this need, but not the whole thing. It's in our area. We want to be involved. We've got the thing. We just need a little bit of help, right? And man, this is honestly a tool that is really underutilized. So I would challenge you to use this more often. In some areas, we've got like tons of different ministries that have joined this exact dialogue, waiting. They don't get the original request because they're not churches. But when the church creates this dialogue, all these other ministries and individuals are included, and they can respond with knowledge or connections to more resources than the church might know are available. Crazy story that just recently happened to me was I activated my community to respond to a request, and I had a lady from Pennsylvania respond back to me. I had no idea she was on this list. She had put herself onto our list because she just wanted to be a part of as much of the CarePortal network as she could, because CarePortal was not active in her area yet. So she just joined everybody else's communities. Well, she responded to me privately and said, hey, I'd like to send you a gift card, a grocery gift card for this mom. And so it was like the coolest thing ever, because I just felt so supported, and I had no idea that resource was out there. I would have never had that opportunity to surprise the mom with an extra helpful thing for her and her family if I did not activate the community on this. So all that to say, use this. I mean, just this is going to be as helpful as you make it ultimately. But the one thing to know about it is it does not include the caseworker. Okay, this is literally just the church huddling together with potentially with some community members saying, how can we help this family? Who can do what? All right. And then another option is the church to church. Okay, so this would be something that honestly I click on this every single time just to know where our church is in relationship to the family versus other churches. The reason I say that is because when you click on this button, it's going to take you to a web page specifically for that one request, and it's going to give you every bit of the information that's already in the email, but it's also going to give you the list of churches that were included on that request, and it's going to be listed by order of who's closest to who's furthest away. So that's really helpful because when I'm responding to a request, I want to know if I'm on the fringe of that radius or if I'm at the center of it. And I want to know if there is a church that is at the center of it that maybe I should logically work through their leadership and really just equip them to do this ministry locally themselves. What you'll find a lot of the time is that the churches that are most often closest to the needs have the least ability to cover all of the resources in their area, which is not surprising. But relationally, those churches that are closest to the need, they have the highest amount of opportunity to make strong connections with those families. And so we want to position those as often as we can. And there's a lot of great stories. I can't even go into all of them of churches that are doing this really, really well. Here's an example of what type of email will generate from this when you click church to church. It's important to know that when you do this, we're not sending a message to the front office of the church. This is actually going straight to the point people for that church along with their pastor. So when you're reaching out to them about this request, I mean, they know what you're talking about. They just might have not been able to respond. And it just gives you a chance to develop a relationship there with their point people. So you're really kind of teaming up with people that are like-minded, that are working in the same vein that you are. So I just love to see how this creates unity within the body of Christ in our areas, reconciliation across different denominational lines, different socioeconomic lines, different racial lines. There's just really a lot of work that can be done by doing this type of outreach and using this type of technology for this. All right. The final thing is just committing to pray. And that's so cool because you don't actually have to be a point person. You don't even have to be like certified or like in the system with a church to be able to do this. It does not verify who is praying. So we can do that and encourage people to do that. And really the form just gives them a kind of a sense of accountability of like, okay, I said I was going to pray, so I'm going to do it. And then you'll notice down below here that the church resources pages and the new features and all that, like click around in there and explore and see what's coming. Because even there's new features that are about to be launched, as you can see. We didn't even cover 2 of the buttons because those are coming in the next couple months. So look into those and explore what's coming and then how that's going to impact you guys. Ultimately, though, it all comes down to that respond button, because even if you activate your community or even if you work church to church, you're still going to want to make a response, because the respond button is the only way to get back in touch with the caseworker. All right. So say you reach out to another church that's a little bit closer to the family and you kind of develop like, okay, we're going to get involved on this one. Okay, well, that means that you both need to go back and make a response to the request, right? Because what happens there is that the caseworker will get a list of the churches that responded, and that's going to be how they identify which churches were involved. And that's obviously how we keep track of your impact. Okay, so it is important to do that. So let's go through just really briefly what happens with the system when you make a response. Okay, you click respond. The system is going to automatically send the information that you entered for your personal contact. That's going to go straight to the caseworker. Okay, and we tell them to contact you as soon as humanly possible, even if that's like a text message. Just know that sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're having a really rough day and it's really busy. So give them a little bit of grace on that. But just in case things fall off and things don't go right, we do send you at the very, very same time. You as a responder will get a confirmation that gives the caseworker's information. Okay, so just you've got it. If you need to use it, just make sure that your heart's in the right place, and remember that they have some really tough days sometimes, and so while it might seem like they don't care that you made a response, They absolutely do. They would not have submitted the response or the request in the first place if they didn't want a church to step in. But just use that wisely, and be encouraging and flexible when you make contact with them. Okay, now when the request is closed, okay, ultimately you and the caseworker have connected, and you've made the response of saying, okay, we got this covered, or between me and 3 other churches, we're going to get this covered. You can tell the caseworker to go ahead and close the request. All right, so that's helpful just because that's going to put out an alert that looks like this to the other churches that receive that request. It just lets them know, hey, this has been taken care of. Praise God, right? But we can move on to maybe the next request, or just kind of put this off of our radar if we weren't involved. Okay. At the same time that this email goes out, the churches or church that did help will get a confirmation email that just asks them to verify their participation. Okay, so if you responded to a request, this is the email that you're looking for, basically giving you confirmation that the caseworker is trusting you to meet the need, or is acknowledging that you did meet the need. All right, and then verifying your participation there is really more of just entering in any good stories that came from this, sharing the number of hours that you had to put in to make it work, which goes into your impact data. So you would obviously want to fill that form out after you meet the family, at least for the first time. All right. Okay, so let's jump into this, because I could spend like an hour just on this. And I've been trying to get to this point as quick as I can, because I do tend to linger on this because I just care so much about it. But we have to recognize that we're impacting more than just the family and the kids here. This work puts us in contact with so many different components of our community, including the families and the kids, obviously, but also the caseworkers. The caseworkers, you may not know this, but they're mandated to let us train them, but they're not mandated to actually use the technology. What that means is that it's really up to the church to make the caseworkers want to use the CarePortal technology based on the experiences that they've had, the encouragement they've seen and feel in themselves from working with the church. Not every caseworker is a believer. And so we really need to understand that they're trusting the church with this access, and we really should not take that for granted. Understanding that they have bad days, and they have a high level of secondhand trauma that they go through. So for the church to respond and be ministering to them, you're going to have their cell phone numbers when you respond. And so there's nothing keeping you from, just like you reach back out to the family a week or two later, to reach back out to the caseworker and say, hey, I just want to let you know again how much we appreciate you. Maybe bring them some Starbucks at their office, or maybe their whole unit could use some coffee, right? I mean, be creative about how you engage that group of people as well. The families and the kids, I do want to just briefly spend some time on the culture of poverty. Is really, really important to understand, because it can throw you for a loop, and it can be offensive if you're not ready for it. What I mean by that is, we tend to go into these interactions expecting the absolute worst, just expecting them to be totally destitute. And sometimes you're going to walk into a family's home expecting to see just crumbs on the floor and nothing else, right? Or, I mean, I don't know what our expectations come from, but like, inevitably you're going to walk in and you're going to see a flat screen TV on the wall every once in a while. And you're going to have that little moment in the back of your head that says, wait a second, am I even supposed to be here? Like, is this family? And maybe we wouldn't say it this way openly, but we start to wonder if this family is really deserving of our help. And just that is so important to guard against and prepare yourself against, because it really cannot surprise us when we witness the very reason why these families are in crisis in the first place. We cannot go into these homes expecting them to have all of their financial strategies in line with their goals, right? We cannot expect them to have a complete lockdown on how they spend or whatever. And honestly, we've got to remember that we don't know where they got that stuff. It could have been a gift. My sister gave me my TV. My wife and I have this big old TV that we didn't pay a dime for. So just remember those types of things too. That you got to be willing to go in and give the benefit of the doubt. When you witness their dysfunctional cycles and the crisis that they're in, they may ask you for more things, right? They may make it known. But the great news here is that you have access to their caseworker just like you have access to them. That means that when they do make it known of other things that they need, your response every time, instead of letting them paint you into a corner and make you feel pressured, your response can be, let me talk to your caseworker about that. And that's just good communication. Their caseworker might actually be working on getting those exact items for them without their knowledge. And so we just want to be good communicators and make use of the connections that you've been given. The other two I'm hoping are pretty generic, right? Understanding that they may not be open to extended contact. There's a power dynamic that gets locked into place when it's the helper and the helpee. And so we just want to be sensitive to that and make sure that we just understand that there's an honor-shame component here, that we want to make sure that they are as comfortable as possible when we're stepping in and providing help. We want to honor them in every step of the way that we can. And then avoiding cameras, that's very much an honor-shame thing. If you're going to talk about these interactions that you've had at your church services or anything, please talk about them as if the family is in the room themselves. There's a certain stigma that comes from having an open CPS case that we just want to respect of that family and dignify them. Engaging local churches that are not currently engaged in CarePortal, right? There's a huge possibility for us to just, call your neighbor who maybe attends a different church. Call your cousin's church that you know is closer to the family that you see a request come from. There's nothing keeping you from inviting other churches to come along with you and just say, hey, we just want you to meet us there when we show up to this home because you are more local. That's how this network strengthens organically. It really doesn't work for people like me to go door to door trying to recruit churches because they don't know me. If they know you and they get this invitation to see how legitimate this access is, they're way more likely to sign up. And so I encourage people all the time to talk about CarePortal like it's your favorite restaurant, right? If we did that and we just said, look, come with me, but then after we go and visit this family, go and check out the CarePortal website. There's a really cool way that the homepage of the CarePortal website, it literally asks visitors what perspective they have, right? Are they a business owner? Are they a ministry leader? Are they just somebody who cares? Are they an agency leader? And when they click on that perspective, they tell the website all the information that is relevant for them. And the website basically takes them to a page that has all of that laid out for them. It's a really, really well done thing. I'd highly recommend it. And then the last thing here is just the opportunity to impact our own family and friends. And there's a quick story that I share. I can't not share it. It's too good. One of our state directors in Oklahoma, he tells a story of when he brought his son to a CarePortal request for a bed, right? And so I think his son was like 10 or 12 years old, and he got tears in his eyes talking about what it was like to bring his son to this situation where his son was realizing that this bed that we're bringing into this home was the very first piece of furniture that this family had. They were eating and sleeping on the floor. And this was somebody that was not right down the road from where they lived. I mean, his son may have even gone to school with one of these kids that was in this home. It was not in some other distant land. It was not on some trip. It was in their own community. And so his son is just kind of processing this and witnessing this. And Chris, the director, I mean, he lit up in talking about the kind of conversation that he got to have with his son on the way home from that family, and how suddenly serving Christ and being the church meant so much more to his son when he got to do that kind of work on a normal Tuesday afternoon with his dad, and just the discipleship that happens within that family. Man, you can't buy that, and you can't force those opportunities. They don't come very often so organically like that. And so that's one of the great things that I love about CarePortal, is just not just the fact that we can go and help families that need to see and understand how God is there for us spiritually and eternally, but also, man, how we then grow in maturity. It's such a natural byproduct of that. So I'm going to fly through these, but please don't go alone. But we also got to be careful not to go as a mob, okay? So it's all about that right balance. Understanding these are really delicate situations. A lot of the families live in pretty close, tight-knit quarters with each other, and so when you show up with more than like 3 or 4 people, it can be really sweaty and awkward pretty quick. So, just be wise about that. Not going by yourself, it's not even just about protecting yourself, it's also about protecting the family. And you never want to put anybody in a he said, she said situation where you don't have just people around you that, at least for the first couple interactions with a family, to just make sure that everybody's kind of living above reproach and building a relationship of trust, okay? Understanding there's more to the story. We talked a lot about that before. Sometimes the caseworker, there's way more going on to their day than you might realize. You also have to give that same token of grace to the family. We tend to show up to these homes, and I mean, I'm guilty of this myself sometimes, but we tend to just somehow think that we're an expert on their family and their situation because we read a paragraph about what's going on. We need to show up curious to these homes and these situations. When we show up curious, we end up asking better questions. We give benefit of the doubt way quicker, and we're able to build relationship way faster. So understanding that there's more to the story and avoiding those assumptions that end up preventing us from developing the relationships. Calling the caseworker, this is important. It has not really ever, not that I know of, has been an issue anywhere, but we still have to acknowledge that we're all mandatory reporters. And so while these caseworkers are submitting CarePortal requests because there is no known abuse happening in the home, we do need to just acknowledge that if you do see something, you need to report it. You need to call the caseworker back and let them know that. And I mentioned this before, but also calling the caseworker if the family asks you for additional services or items. That's just one, again, good communication, but sometimes too, you might even just see a need yourself, and the family might not have even requested it, but you just say, well, your kitchen has no food in it. Can we go and bring you some groceries? You could always do that and offer that just as a way of honoring the family. But again, you want to just let the caseworker know that that's what you're doing, okay? Being a light, your encouragement has so much power. And I just want to challenge you to find those pieces of strength in the family and call them out so that they can just, I guess, hear something positive from the church, from the community about what they're doing and how they're fighting to keep their family together. That's such a really influential way of protecting them, is just speaking life over them like that. And I say this a lot too, but light doesn't really do much unless you go into dark places. We've got to be willing to take the light of Christ into dark situations, dark places, so that it can really do what it does best, and that's just to illuminate hope, illuminate just opportunity for recovery, for redemption, for reconciliation, all of those great things. And finally, the cash thing, we just say no cash, all right? Even try to avoid gift cards if you can, so that you can maybe spend more time with the family shopping directly with them. But just be wise about that. I know most churches have policies about all that. Almost done. I think this is like the second to last slide, so I'm going to fly through. The policies that you guys can set on an internal basis cover this idea of how are we going to cover the financial part of the request, right? Is this going to come from the church budget? Is it going to come from individual families on a case-by-case basis? just however you develop that, try to be as proactive as possible rather than reactive so that you can respond a little quicker to requests that come through. And another piece of that is, man, how can we invest in the CarePortal technology so that this is something that the church owns to the level of expanding this to more counties as well as deeper in within our own county. We would love to see, $100 donation once a month from your church, $20 donation once a month from your church. Something that just, it's not a subscription, it's not a contract, but just something that shows that the church is engaging in the way that this is spreading across the country. You saw that map, and that's because people are giving to spread this across to other states and to other areas. So I just encourage you with doing that. And then, basic stuff like finding out who in your church has a truck, who are the plumbers, who are the electricians, who works from home and has a really flexible schedule, all these really basic things, but it just helps to kind of go through them at the very beginning of this so that you understand, spiritually speaking as well. I mean, you likely will not read Ephesians 6 the same way after you make a few responses to CarePortal requests, because the front lines ministry work, it just illuminates the battlefield so much better, and you realize really what those forces of the enemy are at work all around us, and so that we need to get that armor of God ready before we go, and to really build that up. And I also encourage you to just set goals and expectations as often as you can. Praying for each request is such a basic thing to say that we're going to do, but just remember, when you get the email, that represents a proximity for your church to that family. And so that's not just a random request, that's a local family for your church. And so to respond in prayer at the very minimum would be huge. And then to set a goal of saying, hey, let's respond to at least one request a month. I also love to see churches that say, well, we're going to respond to literally every single request that comes through for these 3 zip codes or these 5 zip codes, because that's really where our congregation lives. What a great way. You might not be able to respond to the whole request every single time, but to say that, look, we're going to be involved in requests for this area. You can set those goals now, right, and communicate that to your teams. And this is the last slide here, just what's next? I mean, okay, so responding to your first request, I would actually recommend going to the map first, or going to the website and clicking on finding all the open requests that don't have responses yet. It gives you a little bit more control if there are open requests that don't have responses. I almost hope that they're not, because that kind of means it's like 100% response rate at the moment. So that's great, but it gives you more of an option of like, okay, well, this seems more fitting to our style or our area or whatever. So you can always do that. And then there's a unique URL for each of your churches that basically gives you a real-time update on the impact that you guys have made up to that moment. This is what's on the screen here. So the contact ministry leader button, it literally will even list all of the open requests that your church specifically has been included on at that moment. And so what's so cool about this is that because it's unique for every church, you can pull this URL and actually incorporate it into your website, so that you can say from stage or from the announcement platform, you can say, hey, if you're curious about what CarePortal looks like for our church, go to our website and click on the CarePortal page, and you'll see everything you need to know, including a contact form that gives them a way to contact, essentially be contacting you as the ministry leader. So make use of that. I think that's such an amazing feature there. Getting businesses involved and getting friends, just sending to them to the website to say, well, hey, click on where you fit best from this perspective list, and just see what you can do from your gifting, from your perspective. Your community coordinator is basically the person for your active community that's really kind of tasked with gathering up the churches on a regular basis, maybe quarterly, to meet and discuss and learn and share. And they're also kind of there to facilitate connections between different community partners. We talked about the cost of poverty experience. Man, talk through that. And if you guys wanted to plan one, And we typically would suggest planning it for at least 60 days out, just to give you a way to, recruit and get everything together. But let me know if you're interested in that. And then you can always enroll and help get us started with Tier 2 in your area as well. So those are requests that are more relational focused. Usually they're a little bit of a different group of people that are more interested in maybe babysitting or coaching or mentoring, things like that. So let me know if you're interested in any of that and we can jump into it. But really that's it. And I'm a little over time. I apologize for that, but I appreciate everything that you're doing in your community. I hope that this just fans that flame and gives you so many great opportunities to go and represent our faith and share and encourage families. Obviously, I am available. If you need anything, just let me know, and we'll see what God does. I love this technology so much, and I cannot wait to just be on the sidelines cheering to see your church engage in this work. All right. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.